Hey everyone, and welcome to the Building Geniuses podcast, where we talk to geniuses throughout the commercial real estate and building automation industries, asking them how they've gotten where they are, who's walked alongside them, and how they're helping others along the way. This is episode 10 of season 2, and I'm your host, Tim Vogel. In today's episode, we're speaking with Ari Reubin of Darwin's Beagle. Hey, Ari, how are you today? Welcome to the Building Geniuses podcast.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here. We haven't known each other very long, but the conversations we've had have been markedly warm and honest and candid and helpful and encouraging. And it didn't take very long for me to be like, I need him. I need him on the podcast. And
I think we both have a few things in common. At the core is that we pursue truth.
Yes. Well, and there's just a compatibility here, for lack of a better term. So I think there's some great conversations, not just this one, but that we're going to be having in the future, which I'm really looking forward to. But for this one, why don't we kick it off and just tell the audience exactly who you are and what you spend most of your time doing these days?
I think the most important thing that I do is to help leaders navigate change and to evolve to better outcomes. Now, I would say, Tim, for the last, 15 or so years, really since 2006, there's been a particular focus in corporate and commercial real estate. And the interesting thing to me is that it echoes the past, which is when I say keeping people safer, when people might say environmental health and safety or things having to do with well-being, to me, it goes back to my first favorite job, which is being a lifeguard. I love keeping people safe. I just do. Whether it's back in the day, slipping on the pool deck, or right now, breathing in harmful toxins that somehow have been aerosolized, through no fault of their own, just because they walk into a built environment, be it a hospital, be it a school, be it an office building.
So keeping people safe, and then likening that to being a lifeguard, that's a connection, or it's an analogy, right, that I haven't quite heard from anyone in our space. It's an interesting one.
It's far stronger. It's a passion, and so I'm a big believer in, you want to talk about analogies or metaphors, in the ripple effect. So back in the day when we were all young, we would take rocks or some kind of object and we would toss it into a body of water, maybe a pool, maybe a pond, maybe an ocean, and we would be fascinated by watching it skip. But what was also happening, aside from that transference of energy, and it's because it has three choices: to be absorbed, transmitted, or reflected, was also the reflection part when it creates standing waves. So I think that when we make decisions, whether it's for our own self and our future, our career, whether it's for our families, whether it's for our businesses, we make decisions that impact others. So I have pioneered a concept called the concentric impact model, or CIM, which says that if you make a decision that, let's say, a CEO of a company, that you're going to make sure everyone is vaccinated before they walk in the front door, or you're going to make sure that everyone has a physical every 6 months, or something like that, there's an impact. And I'm not saying it's all good or it's all bad. There's simply an impact. It's a ripple effect. And so, for example, if I say, let's say I'm your CEO, I say, you know what? I care so much about you that I want to make sure that every 6 months you have no issue of money, and you go see a doctor to just do your basics, your basic, triage, your blood pressure, your blood oxidation, all that normal stuff, get some history. Well, first of all, it takes time. You got to go drive to the office. You can't do it through telemedicine. You have to take blood. So there's an impact. There's an opportunity cost. Now the doctors are happy because they see more traffic. It increases their transactional velocity. They may have to hire more people. The cities like that because that creates more tax revenue. Now, when you go back into the workplace, it might decrease absenteeism, or it might increase decision velocity, or it might even increase EBITDA. So if you think about different vectors of impact, that's kind of how my mind works. And when I think about keeping people safe, for example, indoor air quality. A lot of people through the pandemic have been been told that we'll just measure forehead temperature. A lot of people in workplace and real estate know that that's just theater. Like any of us, I got here because of my mentors. Um, on those shoulders, I sit proudly and I see the world with much better perspective. I look around and see great vistas that I couldn't see if standing just with my own feet planted on the ground. So one of my mentors, one of 6 or so, is the former Surgeon General, actually the 17th Surgeon General for the U.S. Air Force, General Dr. Carlton. And he said very, very early on, really February of 2020, when I asked the question, I said, General, sir, what is this? And he says, in his general voice, he says, it's a respiratory disease. And I said, well, I hear murmurings of people wanting to go to Walmart and get a forehead temperature. And, nothing against Walmart and everything, except they have really good prices. He said, that's just theater, Ari. He said, you're going to miss close to 90% of the people with symptoms if you just measure their temperature. What you have to do is a multi-layer. You have to start with their blood oxidation. You have to start with you have to add to that their heart rate, ideally their blood pressure and such, because then you have an indication that the body's working harder to get the blood flowing, to get oxygen to all the vital places. And when that's compromised, you know that there's something going on. You don't know that it's COVID, and for that you require a secondary test or some kind of confirmation. The reason I bring this is because what he said early on was, A, it's a respiratory disease. B, is don't get sidetracked by the theatrics, some of the political theatrics. C, is think about the air. There's all kinds of standards in the case of buildings. ASHRAE is one of those organizations. And they say, okay, turn a volume of a particular room or space 4 to 5 times an hour. And when you do that, have set points for volatile organic compounds or for other particulate in terms of concentrations of parts per million. And whatever those set points be, similar to a thermostat, say set at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, let's say you have your VOC set at 50 ppm for whatever it might be, well then fine, then remediate. So monitor, remediate. It's kind of what we call a Texas two-step. So monitor, remediate, do something about it, right? So get the stuff out of the air so people don't breathe it. Now, having said that, not everyone who ingests, whether it's air or bad water, is gonna suffer. However, if you have somehow been compromised through whether it's just normal aging or some other ailment, then fine. Then your risk factors go up. It's just normal. So instead of compounding those risk factors and causing an exponential add-on or impact, again, concentric impact, arrest it, remediate it. So clean air, filter it. And there's many ways to filter. Many companies have solved it. But I believe all those ways should be connected to a building. I think a building should have a central nervous system. I think similar to a cell phone, I think buildings should be updated in a normal way, every week, every 2 weeks, with all kinds of drivers and firmware. Because there's lots of systems to monitor in a building, not just air quality. Certainly every system needs to be performing for its intended use. But I do think that the way I got here and others I know is on the shoulders of great giants. General Carlton would certainly be one of those for me.
I think in just the short period of time between me asking about the lifeguard analogy and this, I think you've demonstrated quite clearly, like, one of the reasons that I've enjoyed talking to you as much as we had the last short time here, because you take it back. You started off by saying it's a passion, but then you take it back and you say, and that's the model that I try to approach everything with, and it. Then you went deep very quickly. Right? You were talking about ppm, and it's like, that's how we solve these bigger problems. So you get this idea of like what a bigger problem is or a bigger concept, but then you're able to drill down, a mile or two deep to try to get to the heart of it. And you've done quite a few things, through your consulting and working with businesses and helping leaders navigate change, whatever the problem has been. By doing that,
Right.
But my next question is, how in the world did you get your brain to start thinking about that? Has that just always been kind of a natural inclination to not just accept something as it is, but to dig down and understand exactly why it is the way it is? And you know what? Maybe it doesn't have to be this way. And here's the levers and wheels to turn to change it.
I think a lot of us, at least educated in this country and certainly other countries, should be excluded. I don't know, when we were, I think in pre-K, maybe K, we all played connect the dots. It was how our teachers caused our eye-hand coordination to associate with image cognition. And so we could make a cat, or we could make a word or a letter or some other image. And in some cases they were numbered, in some cases it was free. But there's a training process that occurs, and now some people, I don't know, they love that. They stay in that mode. So I happen to think of it in a few different dimensions of space-time. I think in the given moment when you are on that paper, it's in two dimensions, right? Literally, X and Y. Arguably Z, because graphite gives off a few little dust particles, right? But I think when I think about this conversation, this question, it takes me back to, my memories of crawling, believe it or not. And I think about each lesson I learned navigating a left turn or a right turn. It makes me think about coloring in the lines or outside the lines, even eating paste and what that tasted like when I was, in kindergarten. We all loved eating Elmer's glue.
Cause and effect, yeah.
Cause and effect. But I, for whatever reason, I have a strange memory. On the one hand, my children, for example, I think can all easily remember the words of songs, the lyrics. Now, I've been a musician for 40 years, so you could put a tune on the radio, I could pull out my clarinet and, pretty much instantaneously bring it back.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't remember words. The Star Spangled Banner, yeah, sure. It's been repeated so many times. And there's also a passion there. But for some reason, my memory works in strange ways. But if you were to tell me, as my teacher of physics, as a sophomore or junior in high school, some lesson in optics or in quantum mechanics or something, I'm most likely going to remember it. I'm also probably going to remember the buoyancy equations, and also, for whatever reason, when you throw a baseball, how the shape of the parabola, or in statistics, the bell curve, and the reason why you have, different, 1 sigma versus 6 sigma representations on that curve, as you deviate from X bar, from the mean. I don't know. I have a strange memory where I connect dots. And so when we're having a conversation, I think of it as that piece of paper, but across time, across centuries, across the decades of my own life, even somehow, I know this sounds strange, but somehow envisioning future conversations, what those might be like. So right. At the end of the day, I think I connect dots, because I sense it'll do something to inch the ball forward to keep people safer. But I also want to create value for each conversation I'm in. I'm gullible that way. Like if you and I were having a conversation and you mentioned something about a business idea. So I have this simultaneously macro and microeconomics frame where I think about the financial model and the sensitivity analysis for different market assumptions. And I also think about how the quarks and other quantum phenomena are dancing around and looking at each other, having these discussions and impingements. And so I do think about all these things simultaneously, but along the arc or trajectory of creating value, of keeping people safer, of reducing risk. So there's like this drumbeat that's going off, and as long as the cadence is that of how we interpret time, which is, currently a function of our rotation around the sun. But as long as I sense that there's a sequencing, and that each time that we hear the tick-tock, that it's a creation of value, and it's a step, it's a process, whether it's a flowchart kind of process or something else, then it motivates me. It fuels my creativity engine, and says, okay, I'm in this conversation. I'm gonna connect dots. I'm gonna create value. But if for some reason I'm with the wrong people or I'm in the wrong situation, I kind of look at the clouds and kind of daydream.
Yeah. Well, and and account for the specks of graphite coming off the paper on a z-axis. Yeah. Even in the middle of an analogy, it's like not good enough. No, because it in fact is not 2D, and so my analogy is already broken down. Yeah, so it's that real time analysis, but that's that's the adaptability, and that's being able to take all kinds of information in at a single point in time, and then adjust the trajectory forward as needed.
Let me tell you a conversation that occurred that probably will fascinate you and especially your audience. This is when I was the global practice leader for innovation at CBRE. I got a call one day from the fellow who was then the CIO, very well known in the commercial real estate space. He's pretty much a CIO's CIO, in fact, even outside the space. And he says, hey, we have I think it's okay to say this in a public way. I don't think it violates any confidentiality laws. CBRE has hundreds and hundreds of clients, probably close to 3,000 corporate clients, and one of those or a handful of those are in different sectors. So for example, telecom, and one of those in that sector is at the time was Sprint. I don't know if they're a client at this moment, but at the time, this is 2008. Yeah, 2008, early 2008, I get a call and the CIO says to me, he says, hey, we're having an issue with Sprint, because, the relationships operate within 5-year master service agreements. He said they have a bunch of patents and they don't know what to do with them. And this isn't a real estate discussion. This is an engineering discussion. And you being an engineer and them being a real estate client puts you at a perfect overlap point. Would you be willing to talk to them and find out what to do with all their IP, with all their intellectual property? And I said, yeah. That's like saying to a kid, would you like some ice cream? So I call up the appropriate person and we have a conversation, and I come to the conclusion what we really need to do is get the right people together and have an ideation, have an innovation moment, have a brainstorming. And I came up with a framework. And it was interesting because I'm getting to your other point about the graphite dust. So ultimately, we went to Overland Park at their headquarters. They had a room dedicated for innovation, very inspiring, the right lighting, the right furniture, the right textures, even the right, westing, little figure eight particles. Little particles doing figure eights in the air. It was all good. Might have been eucalyptus. So I said, I'm going to need an analyst who can take notes, and they have to have a laptop that can be transmitted onto a big ass board, 110-inch screen. And we need to see that real time because we're going to do some voting. And they go, what do you mean? Well, we're going to have an X and a Y axis. We're going to let each person represent a patent. There's 32 patents. Each person is going to represent a patent. Some people might have 2. They're going to get 20 minutes to represent it. We'll get 10 minutes to discuss and vote. On the X-axis, you're going to have dollars. On the Y-axis, you're going to have time. So it's going to be a cube. So you can imagine high, low, high, low. So on the low time to implement and the low cost to implement, you're going to want a lot of clustering of ideas, because if it's really low time to implement and low cost to implement, so then hot damn, let's do it. Where's the barrier? As long as there's a high goodness of fit to your strategy. So we went through all these, went around the room, and one by one we plotted them. It took hours and hours and hours. And it was good discussion, all kinds of patents. At the end of the day, only one was in the low, and it was having to do with QR codes. And so I thought about it, and I said, well, shoot, I have a budget. I know what to do with that. And they said, what do you mean? I said, for sale and for lease signs have been the same forever. Why don't we add a QR code to them so that when people walk up to them, whether they're driving by or walking by, they can bring up information, and as long as they've registered for the app that we have to create, they can do a buy now. And what do you mean? I said, well, let's think about it as a horse race. In one lane, you have, for thousands of years, people somehow calling up or sending a carrier pigeon over to a broker and saying, hey, I want that, whatever that is, whether it's a building or an office. And the broker, lets them kick the tires, and there's a certain conversion rate of, let's say, 100 calls into one deal. And I don't find that to be so efficient. Plus, it's happening in the dark. You never know when they saw the property.
Mm.
On the other lane of the horses racing each other, it is this app which can be, looked at objectively. Oh, we had 10 people come at 10 in the morning and click, and we can now see clustering certain times of the day, and maybe we'll serve coffee or lunch when there's a clustering of more people visiting, right? Because that'll increase the conversion rate. And then, as long as we register you, Tim Bogle, on that app, we can then map over your information right into the contract. So when you press buy now, oh, and by the way, we can be language agnostic. It could be Spanish, it could be, Hangul, whatever it is. So all we care is the data underlying, which is what's the property, when's it built, what's the lease rate, what's the TI budget, and so forth. Anyways, I decided to call it Smart Signage. And all we needed was to beta. So I reached out to my friends, inside CB, and said we need a lot of properties for sale. So ExxonMobil at the time was selling 20,000 gas stations all over the world. So I made a challenge. I said, well, let's give Group A to do what they normally do, and let's get Group B this app will create. We did it. By a 3-to-1 ratio, the Smart Signage won. They made more money faster than the old traditional way. So when I was in the room where in Exxon headquarters, where they were asking the question, this is going back to your point, someone asked, well, you're saying that a phone could see a QR code. How does that work? And so I was thinking to myself, well, shoot. When I was at Texas Instruments, I was the group CEO of the sensor business over image sensors. I know how to answer that question. So I told them all about how a semiconductor works, how it understands high voltage versus low voltage when it sees an image, how it converts that in the whole, analog to digital conversion process and each of those steps. And there was about 350 people in the room, and they just started laughing. And they said, we didn't think you were going to take us seriously, but dude, thank you.
Yeah. It's like, well, I mean, you asked me a question, yeah, and I knew the answer. Like, I'm not going to not answer.
Right, I have to. It was like, again, it's like, when I got the original question about IP, yeah, you want to find something, you want to go fish in a barrel, we'll find something valuable, and it's easy because there's lots of concentration. But it turned out that was a very, very important moment, and we did a global launch after the 3-month trial in November of 2008 at an event called Green Build, which at the time was, very important. And the whole intent was, make more money, have less stress, increase transactional velocity, help the environment by consuming less paper. All kind of like optimized in one little thing and tied up in a bow.
Yeah, it's such a simple solution. And now I feel like QR codes in a lot of ways are almost taken advantage of. I mean, you see them all over the place. Or not taken advantage of, taken for granted. I'm sorry, that's what I...
Well, it's interesting. So I went a step further in my documentation. I said, so that the whole thing isn't taken advantage, but instead of leveraged, what if you're doing facilities management at a building? Let's say it's your job to maintain a 40-story office building in downtown Chicago. And you go down there, let's say it's not predictive maintenance because there's sensors telling you there's something vibrating too much. Or it's not scheduled maintenance because, you say every 45 days we have to go inspect these bearings. But instead, a boiler just busts out and leaks and is spewing hot steam everywhere, and there's like threat of lawsuits and all kinds of threat of injury and incident reports. So that happens, unfortunately. So I said, what if instead every piece of equipment, once it's commissioned for that facility, that we put a barcode on it and we associate to a file, and that file is universally accepted as the one version of the truth. So whatever that is, even if it's a Google Doc, fine, that's the one we access. So I said in that file, we could show the serial number, the manufacturer, when it was delivered, who installed it, the vendor's name, all these things, and the maintenance history. So when the maintenance guy, let's say you're the maintenance guy, you go to it and you use your smart signage, it pulls up all that, and you see the part, all the parts are listed, and not only can you order it, but your phone is geocoded. And people who are dispatching can know that let's say there's been 20 truck rolls that morning and there's people out. There's a route that can be optimized to your location that can also hit a few other locations on the same run.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden you're helping the building, right? Because you're monetizing their investment in all their infrastructure, but you're also monetizing their investment into you as a supplier, as a facilities manager. Mm-hmm. And so, you could imagine if at that moment, also, if I'm a property manager and I'm touring a building and I'm showing you, here, these are all the amenities of the building, and each door has a barcode on it, and each artwork has a barcode on it. And maybe there's some artwork in the lobby that you're just an art history buff and you love, and you realize that, wow, I haven't seen that. I didn't realize that Picasso had his cubic period, whatever. Mm-hmm. So you just say, I like that. I want that. I want a copy for my home. Well, we can do that.
Yeah.
So I envisioned that with the basic IP documentation, and I think it created value. But Tim, at the core of it, it was just connecting dots.
It reminds me of the other analogy of a crawl, walk, run.
Sure.
And going back to your memories of crawling. Let's go back a little further before that even. I mean, you went to school, you got a degree in the sciences. Tell us a little bit about that. What led you into that, and how did it ultimately lead to where you are now? Yeah, I mean, you had interesting years in your 30s.
My late father started out as a mathematician, and then he became an engineer. And during World War I, he served our country in what was called the Air Corps. Now it's called the Air Force, so it's part of the U.S. Army. Yeah. And he developed an expertise in what was called radar. It's still called radar. It's a acronym. Anyways, he had been tasked to work with MIT and some other schools to collaborate with England because the UK had been preparing for this war, whereas we were, not preparing so much for the war. In fact, we were trying to avoid it. And so ultimately, we engaged in a big way and won it in a big way and changed the world in a big way together with our partners, our allies. But that also echoed through my mind as he told those stories. And as he got older, he told me more stories because he held them on until he was in his 80s. And then for the last 10 years of his life, he was just it was like getting a drink of water out of a fire hydrant. It was just so rich with content that I started. Every time we spoke, I would write it down, and I transferred those notes to my sister, and she ultimately wrote a book from it. But
oh, wow.
From that moment of listening to his stories all through life, wherever we were living, anywhere in the world, because we lived all over the place, I said, I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to be just like him. The problem is that I wasn't good at math growing up, and whereas for him, it was like, this is natural as breathing air. For me, it was like taking a Band-Aid off every time I would open a book, going, oh, yeah. Gosh, this hurts. Yeah. And I would avoid it, and I would cry, And then, I don't know, I got inspired by a girlfriend to start studying, and I started learning that I can actually get 100%, and I started getting money thrown at me, getting perfect grades, and ultimately decided, okay, I'm going to be an engineer. So I got my first engineering degree in material science, specifically in metallurgy. I got a dual degree in marketing. I went to graduate school to go get a PhD in metallurgy, but stopped and got a master's instead in polymer engineering.
So why the change?
Well, I love materials. I have a basic question in my head, which is, what makes wood wood? What makes metal metal? What makes a particular metal like steel, or a particular type of steel, plain carbon versus a stainless steel? So I I have I don't know what it is, but I've always fantasized about having an interview with God and saying, well, why did you give these atoms these particular attractive properties, or valence, their interest to combine? Why sodium and chlorine combine this way? That this way they're liquids and this way they're solids, and I want to know why. And I just wanted to know. Not only that, but when you're looking for making a bridge or making a semiconductor or making a lamp or making a screen for a phone, why choose that material? What gives it its material properties? It's Young's modulus, it's notch hardness, its impact strength. What is it about a material that makes it that particular material? Mm-hmm. And then what is it about that particular material that makes it most suitable, also from a cost standpoint? Mm-hmm. And I just was fascinated by it. And I thought, I could do this forever until I realized, what I really want to do is become an expert at materials. And then I want to use it to solve problems to keep people safer. Mm-hmm. So I looked at it as a stepping stone. So in my own life, I connected dots, and I said, the first dot that I need to connect is I need to know the heck out of materials. And then I need to become really good at math because that's useful in statistics and other kinds of sciences. So I did. I earned various certifications like Six Sigma and other certifications, and realized that these methodologies are very much like your sequencing of crawling to running, because you understand a situation by first defining it. Define, measure, analyze, improve, control. You define what's going on. You analyze through sensitivity analysis. What if I do this? What if I do that? And you change assumptions and toggles. And then you say, okay, well, I'm seeking a certain targeted outcome. Like I want it to be a bridge, or I want it to survive a bullet, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And you do an analysis, and then you implement it, and then you monitor the implementation to make sure it's controlled. You look at the variance, and hopefully you decrease the variance each moment. And so I care about that a lot, and it applies to abstracting leases. It applies to the production of semiconductors, of vehicles, mm-hmm. painting operations. If you're looking at measuring the amount of ATP, the adrenaline triphosphate, or some other energy carrier or compound for cells to do their function, you can measure these things. So, for example, if you're looking at if you're a big car company and you do hundreds of steps over a period of time to produce a vehicle, and you realize that at some point they're joined together and it drives off the lot. But before they do that, they clear coat it. Well, sometimes thousands of cars can be scrapped because there's little bugs or microbes in the clear coating. That's material science. Mm. What makes that material so interesting for them to grow there? Similarly, what makes the SARS-CoV-2 virus so interesting, so interested in the human being, in the mucus of the respiratory system, to say, we like that. That's perfect for us. Or if you go into a hospital, into a chiller in a building, and it's at the right temperature and it's the right turbidity, the Legionella bacteria says, hot damn, that's perfect. We want to raise a family right here. And that develops, and then that gets aerosolized, and people, get Legionnaire's disease, and God forbid, die of pneumonia. So all these things are impacted by building control systems, are impacted by material science, are impacted by financial modeling. You have to justify everything. And so my basic driver to be an engineer and to be applying it into business is to know all points of view. I want to know the point of view of every single stakeholder. In management school, you think about those who are responsible, those who are accountable, those who are consulted, those who are informed. They're called RACI diagrams. So I want to understand the lens of RACI. I want to understand why it is someone feels a certain way standing or sitting around the table, and to be able to engage in a meaningful way so we can all achieve a decision point and then move forward. So that's why.
How in the world did marketing get thrown in there? Why not finance or business proper?
Well, after I did a soft retirement from Texas Instruments, I was 35 years old, right? So when I was 33, the chairman asked me to be I had an opportunity to be the CEO of a global practice group. My size, 700 people, making all kinds of chips for different types of sensors. And when I was all done with that in 1998, I reached out to my contacts. A friend of mine was a deputy general counsel in the company, and he said, "Hey, go to University of Texas. They're always looking for people to teach." And so I went and met the dean, and I thought it would be like a multi-month process. And literally in 3 minutes, he says, "Oh yeah, when do you want to start?"
Yeah.
And so I was teaching strategy to MBA students and to honors students in the senior year, and I loved it. So I ended up staying there for a while. And marketing has four pillars to it: product, price, place, and promotion.
That's right. 4 Ps.
I've been focused. Arguably, there's 5, which is partnering, which is almost a hybrid or fusion of place, but I believe that most of my engineering career has been spent on product or product development or roadmap. But as I matured, especially living in Japan, Korea, and places like that, and being in other parts of Europe and Asia, Far East, Middle East, I learned pricing needs to be elastic, and the form function thing that was pioneered by people like Frank Lloyd Wright, who himself probably could have done a better job on some of his structures. Falling Waters is a good example. But anyways, I don't think that engineering is valuable enough on its own. I think a lot of technology companies make the classic mistake of showing you their beautiful child. This is my child. Isn't he or she beautiful? And that's the product or the solution. Could be software, could be a chip. And they have this kind of, inference on you, like, right? You like it? And you're looking at it and saying, well, what's the pain? What problem is it solving? How big is that problem? And what if I don't solve it? What's the impact of not solving it? So I think it's better to start with marketing, which is asking a question, getting a big Q-tip and swirling it around your ear and saying, what's going on? What's happening? Yeah. And how can I do something that's differentiated and then backfill that with a solution? I think that's where you connect dots. And there's something that exists or something that partially exists and it's partially, in your mind or in someone else's mind, and collaborate, bring it together. I was part of a team that did that. And within 6-7 months, we created a device for doing access control into any built environment, be it a stadium or a hospital, anything between. I helped to invent it in February of 2020 at the onset of COVID. And by August, we were shipping. We were shipping to hospitals, police stations, all over the world. And it was very satisfying to be part of such a team because we were keeping people safer. We were moving the needle in terms of creating tax revenue and creating jobs and creating hope, So it was very, very satisfying. And so I like being part of those.
Yeah, if this is maybe too philosophical of a question, but why do you think, or where do you think the passion comes from to keep people safe?
I think it's part of the way I was raised and part of the way that I think humans were envisioned by our Creator. I am a religious person, and I very humbly accept that I'm a pawn on a chessboard. So if you and I happen to be sitting in a Starbucks together, some might say that's coincidence, but people like me saying coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. So we happen to be sitting in Starbucks and we start talking for whatever reason. Maybe you see something on my screen or I hear something that you say. That's not accidental. The only crime is if we don't act on that moment. So in that regard, I think we're agents of change. Each of us, whatever our age, whatever our health, whatever our thing, we have a unique value that's perfect. We were created perfectly. Every single person I've met has something beautiful and perfect about them. because they can add value. If they choose to not accept that responsibility, that's of course consequential. It's tragic, but that's their choice. They have free will. But those of us who accept that, so I think my passion comes from my humility, knowing that I have been endowed with certain gifts and not endowed with other gifts. For example, I'm really bad at dancing. And remember, I just, in my mind, I'm Fred Astaire, but the reality is I'm like Elaine on Seinfeld,
Yeah.
It's just fine. So be it.
Yeah. There's worse things. Yeah.
But I can jam on a clarinet, and I can draw cartoons, and I can sculpt with clay, and I can do other things, But so I know my role, and I know when I recognize when like that call came to me from the CIO to go connect the dots with some chunks of IP, I would have been remiss. So my passion comes from the humility that my creator said that I'm perfect for this moment. So do something.
Yeah.
And do it with alacrity. Don't just kind of dawdle. Do it.
Well, I'm really glad that you answered that the way you did, because I've been having more and more conversations recently, and even on some recent episodes of this podcast, asking people more about the why behind what they do. And two things that have stood out in recent episodes is, one, a relentless focus on the human experience. And an example I gave, and this was from episode 8 with a guy from Microsoft named Emmanuel Daniel. I'm not sure if you've ever run into him. But he even took it down to the level of, if we can do something on our campus that allows an employee to have 5 extra minutes with their children in the morning, like, that's a win for us.
So that's what I call the impact. Right, part of the impact. There's a ripple effect, because now his child will treasure that. We'll savor that, because in that moment, the father may have noticed, "Wow, I've never seen you wear that outfit before. You look great."
Yeah,
and then he goes to school with all that surge of confidence, and he does something nice to his classmate, or doesn't do something bad. In both cases.
Yeah. Well, and then someone else I just interviewed was talking about how they take an approach of servant. How can I better serve my customers? What is really in the best interest of them? Sure, I can go and make money, and I can come up with cool ideas, and I could try to monetize it. But am I as transparent as I could be? Am I as honest as I can be? And am I really doing what's in the best interest? And so,
listen,
just this,
maybe there's a movement called Adopt a Paradigm. The one you just mentioned is the servant leader paradigm. Fine, find a paradigm that rocks your world, that resonates. Just like a wave in a column that produces the note of B flat. Do that because that's an obligation. But I think I think responsible people who are moving the needle, who are making this world better in whatever way. And I will tell you there's a corollator to that, though. Might be, I don't know, I hope it's not offensive, but I'll tell you in a good way. When I was going through undergraduate, I was fortunate enough for 2 years to intern at General Motors. And I was actually still friends with my original boss. He ended up becoming one of the global head of engineering at General Motors for all welding operations. Anyways, we've been friends since 1983. We love each other like brothers since then. Texting, talking, seeing each other 40 years almost. Anyways, after I finished that period and went to grad school, I came back to GM actually to be a research engineer. And I thought to myself, wow, this industry really needs to get fixed. And it's way above my job grade, and I was 23 years old, and what do I know? So I switched. I said, what though? So I had 2 really strong vectors. One was semiconductors, and the other was defense. They had all 3 had one thing in common: automotive, semiconductor, and defense. In my case, is that it required my IP. I invent things. So I went on a series of interviews. I had 2 job offers with well-known defense companies. In one case, both cases, they're public companies that are very well known even to this day. And one was operating a weapons facility on behalf of the Department of Defense. And they wanted me to, create weapons, very, very specific type of weapons. And I'm sure I would have been good at it. And I literally came back, and the next day I had a FedEx with a job offer. And I was thinking to myself, wow, I got really good grades in school. I got all kinds of I went to school. I got paid to go to school, actually, and I didn't even have tuition. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm good at school, And and I had, I guess, faith in not only my capabilities but also in my limits. So I came to a conclusion when I was 23 years old. I said, I don't think I'm smart enough to know who the enemy is going to be, let's say 10, 20, 30 years from now. So if I create something today, I don't know whose hands those are going to be in 10, 20, 30 years from now. So I'm not going to create it. I'm out. And so I went and stayed on the consumer side. So instead of going to those very, very highly regarded defense companies, and I probably could still be working for them today, probably have a 40-year pension going. I said, no. I said, I'm out. I'm not going to create this. And not because it's bad, because maybe there's people on this podcast that work in a building that's operated by the GSA on behalf of the DOD. Sure. Go seek your fortune, but that's all you. In my case, I couldn't do it. So I think each of us has to know our capabilities and our limits.
Well, that's taking a personal philosophy belief, and you mentioned, you said a faith and capabilities, and then also your limits, and taking it seriously. And that's that same idea that, am I being responsible, and am I serving others the way that I feel and believe that I should? Can we talk about, when did you transition into the commercial buildings? I mean, was there a time where it was like, I didn't really spend a lot of time in commercial buildings, but now it's like, hey, all of a sudden I'm in commercial buildings now.
Well, it was 2006. The transition point was 2004. I was recruited by a law firm to be the CEO of one of their client companies. So law firms have, different kinds of clients. In this case, it was a nanotechnology company, and they were doing something for the utility industry, which was impacting a lot of buildings. And so I became the CEO of that company, and we did well. And so I had my appetite whet, and I was thinking to myself, because I hadn't been in corporate for a while, and I was thinking maybe I should go back. I'd been doing all these consulting jobs. So the same CIO that recruited me in 2008 to do a project once I was in CBRE, back in 2006, before I was in CBRE, he said, hey, we're having a problem in our project management, and there was a big merger at that time. It was about to happen between Trammell Crow and CBRE, and they were sensing all this variance between how projects were done in different parts of the world. And I was able to solve that problem in a way that resulted in creating a platform called Project Management Foundations, which I gave the name of and trademarked. And as far as I know, it's still in use today among many hundreds and perhaps thousands of people. So as I was kind of migrating down this path of doing this work for CBRE in 2006, about 2 months into it, I met the fellow who was a group president at the time. He was destined to be a CEO there. And he didn't know it, but I did. Just meeting him, he was gushing CEO stuff, it was like giving off CEO juju. And so I was mesmerized by his energy. And he says to me, how did you do that? We've been looking at this problem for 7 years. And I said, well, everyone had a point of view. Security had a point of view, and project management had a point of view, and And C-suite had a point. Everyone was 7 or 8 points of view, and I guess facilitated. I used the term I used earlier in the conversation, which is one version of the truth. I created a breadcrumb trail that led us to one common understanding, and from that we precipitated or harvested a common language, and from that we realized the direction we needed to go, which is to create a online learning platform, which incidentally I riffed off of the University of Texas, because they were at the time certifying all the project managers for the new version of the Panama Canal. So they were all coming and getting certified in their PMP, the project management certification. So I said, well, shoot, good enough for them, good enough for us. We'll just, tailor the content and make it CBRE-ish, tie it into the whole performance development platform. And then they'll make some money, everybody will save some money, it's all good. So as I was doing that, I was thinking, wow, it's just a process, just like making a car, just like making a semiconductor. In this case, it's doing a leasing transaction, or it's building a building or something. It's just a process. I started looking back and thinking, well, a lot of people are in these buildings, and they get exposed to risk. And anyways, I was kind of having these thoughts, and so this future CEO says to me, why don't you come join us? Why don't you be an employee? And I said, thank you. It's an honor to be asked, but, I don't know anything about commercial real estate. I don't know how I could be how I could be valuable. Well, that's precisely the reason why you're valuable, because you don't know anything about commercial real estate, and you have absolute objectivity. So I did.
By it all.
Yeah, and so I did, and I think I earned his trust, and we're friends to this day. And he did become a CEO, and it was really an honor. I made it, by the way, in the job offer. He asked, we're talking through it, and he says, any particular ask you want us to put in the document? And I said, really, just one. That says, I have to report directly to you. He says, why would that matter? And I said, well, if you want me to get done what you want me to get done, or if I'm perceiving the mission properly, then the only way I can do it is reporting directly to you. And the only way I can grow is by learning directly from you, because I believe that within the next 10 years, you will be, the CEO. And he says, you're full, that's, he says, fine. I don't know, if you're just, it doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to be a CEO. I says, I think you will be. He was within the 8 years from that conversation.
Yeah.
And so, and I did learn a lot from him that I wouldn't have learned from anybody. And so I think, going back to the mentors, the way we get here, we meaning humanity, is we learn from others. We surf the learning curve and fasten our seatbelts. But surf indeed.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got into real estate, and that's how I even focused even more on EH&S.
So it's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of themes here that will lead us into this last topic really well. So you mentioned your father and patriotism. You mentioned your foundational faith and the safety of others. You've been working with buildings since 2006, and you've garnered a pretty in-depth knowledge of that, and you have a relentless pursuit of the truth. How does all of that, I don't know, come together for Building Cybersecurity Organization and the work that you're doing for them? That's kind of it brings in all those different parts and pieces.
It's risk. So if you're in a hospital and it's, filled with all kinds of permutations of activity, it could be an appendectomy in one ward, and another ward it could be, putting a pin into an elbow from a fall off a trampoline, and another it could be, some very, very sensitive, lung transplant and so forth. You have all these permutations, each one with its own dynamic and set of requirements in terms of time and materials and expertise. But what if the power goes out? And what if it's the result of some bad actor just for whatever reason saying, I don't like you meaning, the organization. So if for example, I was a bad person, I will, let's say in the security part of the organization, and I had all the secret sauce of how to turn off the, let's say the elevators, or turn off particular, operating room, that could be devastating. It could cause injury, it could cause death, it could cause harm to the environment. So that's what we call OT, or operational technology. So there are models, there's such as the Purdue model, which is levels 0, which is dumb stuff like a motor with no brains. Then next up is a PLC, as which is a programmable logic controller, to say this is when you should step, this is when you should sequence. But all these things, they're different degrees, just like with independent driving, national highway standards. So I think that when I think about building cybersecurity, my first response is risk. But in particular, about a year ago, I was having a conversation with the former Assistant Secretary of Defense, a gentleman named Lucian Niemeyer, who I met through the commercial real estate community at a series of events called Realcom. Realcom is kind of like use themselves as the intersection of process and technology for commercial real estate. And I think they do a Switzerland job of it. I think they're absolutely objective, which is hard to do. But they do it. They do it for thousands of decision makers, make things in such a way that they get educated and make decisions. So I met Lucian at this series of events, and we started talking, became friendly. One conversation last summer, he says to me, well, how do you quantify the financial risk of a building experiencing a cyber attack? Not a system, but a building. So I thought about it from the context of looking at risk in general. So when you have something that fails, you call those failure modes. If someone trips, that's a failure mode. If you are taking a test and you don't pass, that's a failure mode. Now, why you didn't pass, that's even more interesting. Maybe not enough sleep, maybe too much sleep, and so forth. So there's a method that the U.S. Army developed more than 60 years ago called failure mode effects analysis, FMEA. It looks at a failure mode along 3 levels, which is what's the likelihood of it occurring, what is the impact of it occurring, and what's the ease of detection of it occurring. And each one is given a scale, a rating of 1 to 10, where 1 is very little and very much. So if, for example, the power could go out in a hospital, what's the likelihood of occurring? Probably a 1, because they have backup power. What's the impact of it occurring? Probably a 10. Probably a 7, because again, they have backup power. Still not good, but it's not a 10. But what's the ease of detectability? Oh, it's probably a 10. It's easy. Right, boom, it's right there. So you add up those numbers and you get an RPN, or risk probability number. So if you look at any system, whether it's a building or whether it's a business or whether it's even any operating activity, you can, let's say, look at all the frequency of occurrence of every single failure mode. So let's say you're a doctor. Let's say you're my doctor, and once a year I come to you for a physical, and I make an appointment, and you come and see me, and you say, hey, dude, everything's good. You send off my blood work for labs, and then your administrator submits it to the insurance company, to the carrier, to get reimbursement as a premium. So let's say my premium is $25, my copay, I should say. Typically within 10 days, maybe as much as 60, you'll get reimbursed between 0 and 100%. Well, what if in a 30-day period, you did a study and said, I'm going to have, let's say, 1,000 patients come through my office in this month. Let's see how many times I get reimbursed. And every time I don't get reimbursed, we'll call that a failure mode. And let's say you count 100 times where you didn't get reimbursed. And you say, wow, there's 100 failure modes. But you kind of drill into the data a little bit more, and you say, well, actually they have something in common. That 80-20 rule starts to kick in, which is, you know what? 50 times out of 100, it was because I had the wrong procedure code. Well, shoot, that's easy. I can fix that. That's better. That means better training for my people, or maybe a software glitch. And let's say another 25 out of the 100, so 75 total, had to do with the wrong spelling of a name. And let's say the other 25 were just a whole, range of things. So on the 80-20 rule, almost 80-20, if you just eliminated those two failure modes of wrong procedure code and wrong spelling, you would solve most of the problems. And within 30 days of implementing or so, you would say, I've made a transformation. So those are the ways that we quantify risk. So similarly, I applied FMEA to building cybersecurity, and everyone talked about it, said, yeah, that's worthy. That makes sense. And that was incorporated into the standard or framework. And so to me, it's just another way of looking at risk. And to me, risk is a proxy for safety, right? Or lack of.
That's right.
So that's how it ties together.
Well, and it seems like you're uniquely suited to be able to help and contribute in those ways, and you're diving into that. Yeah, and you're diving into that head first. And I just want to say that I've so appreciated getting to know you. I look forward to having more and more conversations with you, because I'm always learning. I'm always being challenged. But you're making a real impact in the industry, and you have for a long time. It's very clear, and I think you're going to continue to do so. And I look forward to seeing those continued changes and impacts that you keep making. And hopefully along the way we can make some together. I think that'd be really wonderful.
Think just having this conversation will have a ripple effect.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, thank you, Ari. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
That wraps this episode of the Building Geniuses podcast, a production of KMC Controls. If you've enjoyed this conversation, we encourage you to subscribe and share. And if there's anyone that you would like to be on the podcast, tag them in the comments or reach out to us, and we'll reach out to them. As always, we appreciate you listening. And until next time, learn something new, teach someone something, and build your inner genius.